Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my show. This is the Alizee show. I'm your host, Alizee, and today I'm joined by world-renowned UFO-ologist Nick Pope.
Hello, great to be on.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. So I guess firstly, what I wanted to go over was why have in recent years I've noticed the language has changed somewhat, because when I was younger it was UFOs, but now it's UAPs. Do you know why they've changed that, or has that always been the technical term and now it's just public knowledge?
Well, I've actually got a direct personal story about that. And you're right, the language has changed and it's a deliberate strategic move. And it's not the first time it happened. Way back in the 50s, the term flying saucer was popular, but they changed it to UFO. And that was deliberately done by the United States Air Force to try and destigmatize it, to get resources, to get their own chain of command to take it seriously. So exactly the same happened with this switch from UFO to UAP. We decided, but when I say we, I used to obviously investigate this phenomenon for the UK Ministry of Defence, which is how I got involved. And we needed to rebrand the subject because it had picked up over the years so much pop culture baggage that we were finding it difficult to get our own senior stakeholders in the ministry interested in this. So we didn't invent the term UAP. It had been around for decades, actually, but we adopted it for our internal policy discussions. So it became unidentified aerial phenomena. And in recent years, the United States government saw what we had done. In fact, I went to Washington, D.C. and briefed them on it in 2011. And then the US adopted it, and the rest is history. And it's all part of this wider fringe to mainstream transition that the subject has undergone in the last 5.5 years.
Yes, because I think the first time that I came across the term UAP was, do you remember when WikiLeaks leaked all of the John Podesta, Hillary Clinton emails? And John Podesta, he was talking to someone, I think one of the astronauts of one of the Apollo crafts. He was talking to him about how Hillary Clinton should discuss disclosure of the UAP phenomena. And is this ringing any bells? Because I remember reading about this 7 or so years ago and being like, wow.
Yeah, it rings a lot of bells. I think the astronaut concerned was Edgar Mitchell,
That's it, yeah.
sixth man to walk on the moon, and I had met him a couple of times and discussed this. And in fact, I some years ago also met John Podesta and briefed him about this change of language, and he was very taken with it. And then obviously, although I didn't meet Hillary Clinton, he obviously then briefed Hillary Clinton. And it got into the language. But of course, it wasn't then a party political issue at all, because the Republicans adopted it as well. So, and right now in Congress in the United States, there's bipartisan support for this. So you'll see both Republican and Democratic senators and congressional representatives talking about how we need to put more resources into UAP and get to the bottom of the mystery.
Why do you think Podesta, he was trying to push for Clinton, Hillary, that is, to talk about UAP disclosure it was on some chat show. It's all coming back to me now. And they were also discussing something about talking to the Vatican about quantum field energy. It was crazy stuff in these WikiLeaks emails. But why do you think he was trying to push Hillary Clinton? Granted, this was several years ago in the run up to Donald Trump becoming president. Because from what I know of the UFO phenomena, presidents and presidential elects are on a need to know basis about this type of stuff. It's a temporary job position. They're either president for 4 years or 8 years in America, that is. So I wonder, what was John Podesta's motivation? Because surely the Clintons wouldn't know maybe that much more than, well, we might know.
Well, John Podesta originally came at this as a freedom of information issue, and that was one of the things that he was interested in. And he'd been contacted by an investigative journalist called Leslie Kane, who had been trying to get her hands on some NASA UFO related documents and had hit a brick wall, and Podesta didn't like that. It rubbed him up the wrong way with his commitment to freedom of information. So he got interested in the topic, but then, as you say, he got connected with this kind of bizarre and eclectic group of people that included former Apollo astronauts and others as well, and they all began to realize that they'd been maybe throwing out the baby with the bathwater on this, that because of the giggle factor that surrounded the term UFO, they'd overlooked the fact that pilots were seeing these things, right? Radar operators were tracking them. So Podesta, but again, I come back to the point, it's not a party political issue. It was right across the board. Politicians started to look at it in a more serious way and say, well, look, if we can just set aside the laughter factor and get over the kind of sci-fi memes and things like that, is there anything to this? And the answer came back, yeah, actually there is. And that's kind of where we are now, with multiple UFO-related provisions in the newly signed defense bill, with NASA now doing a study into it. We'll probably get a preliminary report on that in a few weeks, and the main report in the summer. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence has produced 2 public reports on this. There are longer classified versions, of course, that the media and the public won't see. And you know, as I say, the whole situation has changed. The narrative has completely flipped. Very few people are laughing about this now. People are saying, look, I don't know what's going on, but it is a defense and national security issue, and we need to find out.
You must have seen recently, but what are your thoughts on, a month or 2 ago when those UFOs kept being sighted and the US had shot 2 of them down? Because I saw a funny meme at the time, which I agreed with, which was, normal people were saying, oh my God, it's aliens, it's UFOs, it's aliens. And conspiracy theorists were saying, no, it's not, it's just the government. Because the US government, they I don't know if it was Biden's administration, someone in the US government came out and said, we're not going to rule out extraterrestrials just yet. And when I saw that, I thought, well, it's obviously US aircraft. They're just trying to scare people a little bit, because usually they just ignore this type of thing. But what do you think about the UFOs that kept being seen? It was less than 2 months ago, I think. It was a big thing in the media.
Yes, it was very interesting. There were 4 of them. The first one, 100% was a spy balloon. I mean, it sounds very low tech, and the balloon part of it maybe is, but underneath this thing was a really sophisticated signals intelligence platform that was gathering all sorts of communications information. So it was a big deal. That I think what they did then is they thought, my goodness, what have we missed by just ignoring these sorts of reports unless they behave like commercial aircraft or unless they're carrying a transponder or something. So they played around with the settings on the radar, got a little bit more sensitivity, and suddenly all these other things started showing up. And they thought, my goodness, it's maybe more spy balloons. They shot 3 down. They haven't found, or say they haven't found, the wreckage, which is, it's a little odd. And it's a couple of senators have commented in the last day that it's odd that just within a day or 2 ago, the Russians brought down one of those US Reaper drones. And I think I just saw it this morning. There's crystal clear footage of the Russian aircraft. And yet we've got no footage of these other 3 objects. So we don't know about that. Chances are it's nothing extraterrestrial, but it just goes to show that there's a lot up there that you miss if you have this sort of it can't be so it isn't mindset, and you ignore primary returns on the radar. And you mentioned that press conference. I listened to it. It was amazing. It was the NORAD general, as you say, Helene Cooper, who's a journalist with the New York Times, she said, come on, General, what my readers are asking, what everyone wants to know is, could this be extraterrestrial? Have you ruled that out? And his response, as he reported, was, well, at this stage, I haven't ruled anything out. Within hours, anonymous national security sources were walking that back. And then the White House press secretary kind of made a joke about it the following morning, saying that she'd loved watching the movie E.T. When she was a kid. But what it goes to show, I think, is that, look, some of these UFOs, sure, will turn out to be things like spy balloons and drones. We've always known that. The question is, what about that small percentage that we can't explain? Some of it, sure, it'll be our own kind of black project technology that we don't want other people knowing about. But others, that's still up in the air, if you'll excuse the pun.
Yeah, because in my mind, well, realistically to me, if a spacecraft and another species are capable of traveling across the galaxy, intergalactic travel, they're not going to be felled by, I say English, humankind's technology. They're not going to be shot down by our technology. But when it comes to UFOs or UAPs crashing, I'm in the camp where I believe statistically it's gonna happen. If you say you have like 1,000 extraterrestrial visits per year, inevitably at some point one is going to crash. To me, that makes sense. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's always dangerous to make too many assumptions about what extraterrestrials would and wouldn't, could and couldn't do. But I think you're right on the point about crashing. You could say that now, in this era of stealth fighters and sophisticated drones, it's orders of magnitude above and beyond the early days of flight with the Wright brothers, but we still have plane crashes. So unless we thought, and I'm talking hypothetically about other civilizations now, unless we thought there was a sort of magical point where there wouldn't be pilot error or computer failure or a part would suddenly fail due to metal fatigue or something. Unless we thought that would never happen, I think the reality is that just the chance and randomness of the universe will mean that however advanced your tech is, from time to time, something will go wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, as a child, let's go all the way back there. Were you interested in UFOs and the paranormal? Because I know for me, I very much was. And then my dad would help facilitate my imagination. He'd get me books out on Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, UFOs, etc. So as a child, that imagination and curious side of me was nurtured. I'm interested. Were you the same or similar?
I wasn't actually. I'd read. I mean, I read widely as a child, and I'd read a couple of classic sci-fi novels like The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. I think H.G. Wells. That was probably about it. So no, I had no interest or belief in this until I found myself working as a civilian employee at the Ministry of Defense, and in 1991, I was due for a move at exactly the same time as the vacancy came up for the UFO desk, UFO project, whatever people want to call it, and so I just slotted into that as part of the normal Ministry of Defense postings policy, and no interest or belief. To me, it was just, I know this sounds crazy, but just another government job. I mean, obviously, a rather unusual one and quite something to have on the CV, but that was it. And maybe that's the best way to have gone into that without any particularly strong beliefs either way, frankly, so that I could take a data-led approach.
Yes, because you're a skeptic, aren't you? Which I find is the healthiest way to approach, especially when we're talking about fantastical things.
Yeah, 99% of this, maybe more, is going to turn out to be misidentification, hoax, delusion, some combination of all of that. Like I say, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what's left afterwards. And the quicker we can have meaningful investigations on those, all the cases, and we got 200 or 300 each year. And the US government is now looking at several hundred military sightings reported over the last year. As soon as we can get those nailed down and eliminate as many of those as possible, the sooner we can concentrate on the core phenomenon, whatever that might be.
So how long were you at the MOD for?
I was at the MOD for 21 years, on the UFO desk for 3. So it was only one posting in a much wider 21-year career. But of course, it's the one that I always look back on, and it's the one that I guess known for.
Yes, because whilst you're at the UFO posting, like you say, 99% of UFOs are probably just, I don't know, asteroids or drones or random objects that can be explained. But do you remember the first time you came across something or some piece of data where you couldn't explain it?
Well, I'll tell you about a couple of cases. One where we got an explanation, one where we didn't. There was a case fairly soon after I joined where we had a really bright streak of light that had been witnessed late in the evening, just as twilight was arriving across quite a large part of the southwest of England, as I recall, maybe Wiltshire. And I did I thought maybe a large fireball meteor had burnt up in the Earth's atmosphere. I spoke to the Royal Observatory at Greenwich and some other people in the British Fireball Survey. They had heard nothing about it. I went through all the usual other checks, and I thought that it was looking really, really interesting until, and this just shows the why you need these thorough investigations. I was speaking to some of the local air bases, and it turned out I got hold of the weather report, and it turned out that one of the runways at a Royal Air Force base was looking as if it was going to get a little icy. So they said everyone needs to get back to base really quickly. And one of the aircraft was out further in one of the other low-flying training areas. So to get back quickly before the weather deteriorated, it had to do what was called a dump and burn, which was basically it jettisoned its extra fuel. And then to save that fuel falling on people's heads and things like that, it ignited it with the aircraft's afterburner. So what you got was this hugely spectacular display that was the explanation. So that was rather a nice little case, I thought, of something that looked mysterious but turned out to have an unusual but conventional explanation. There was one where we didn't get an explanation, was a huge wave of sightings that took place over a series of about 6 hours in March 1993. So almost exactly 30 years ago, as we're having this conversation. Huge triangular shaped craft, dozens of witnesses, lots of police and military. 2 RAF bases in the Midlands were directly overflown, RAF Cosford and RAF Shawbury. And some of the witnesses described this huge object traveling very slowly, maybe 30, 40 miles an hour, low frequency humming sound, narrow beam of light that moved in a kind of funny way. And then suddenly, from this speed of 30 or 40 miles an hour, the thing just accelerated away to the horizon at high Mach speeds. And one of the witnesses said he'd been in the Air Force 8 years, saw on a daily basis fast attack helicopters, military jet fighters. He said, I'd never seen anything like this before in my life. And that was something that played out again and again with the witnesses. We launched a full explanation, never got to the bottom of it. And those sorts of cases have been reported over the years, not just in the UK, but in the US, all around the world, actually.
How many witnesses were there to that? Hundreds?
Initially, in the first few days, we got maybe 2 or 3 dozen. But later, because there's no national reporting system, because we got some of the cases at the Ministry of Defense, but there were civilian UFO groups as well who got some cases, and of course a lot of people reported to the media. So it took a while for us to get a full count of witnesses, and of course because of underreporting, people often stay quiet, don't come forward at all because of the fear of ridicule or disbelief. We'll never likely know exactly how many, but several hundred for sure.
Did you ever see, it's kind of off topic, but kind of not. I believe it was a long, long time ago, maybe above some town in Germany, hundreds of years ago. There was something in the press about all these citizens of this town had seen these fantastic shapes in the sky, having some sort of, I don't know, putting on some sort of display. And this was hundreds of years ago. And there's still like a clipping of it in a newspaper to this day. Have you seen anything about that?
I have. I think it's Nuremberg, if I remember correctly, and it's either a wood cutting or an illustration on a manuscript. Yeah, and it's very difficult to say with something like this. I mean, of course, in the Middle Ages, people had a lot of sort of fairly complex, superstitious beliefs that were sometimes jumbled up with more conventional religion, and I guess the idea of signs and portents in the sky ran through a lot of that. So it's difficult to say for sure. Did that come up against some sort of celestial event? Very difficult to say. But you know, if that was a one-off, sure. But I guess these things crop up again and again. They crop up in petroglyphs, in medieval and Renaissance artworks, in wood cuttings. One of my favorite ones, actually, I'm a crop circle skeptic, but one of my favorite examples of this kind of historical account is something called the mowing devil. And again, it's an old illustration going back several hundred years, and it shows the devil with a scythe making a circular pattern in a crop field. And the story was that the mowing devil had come down one night and cut some of the farmer's crop. So
oh wow,
there's a great parallel between these ancient accounts, which are, you know, part history, part folklore, maybe difficult to tell, and more modern phenomena. Now, like I say, I'm a crop circle skeptic, but it doesn't make that sort of thing uninteresting.
Yes, I'm a crop circle skeptic as well, but I can't wrap my head around how some people, because some of these geometrical patterns that you see from above, I can't wrap my head around how people know to do that, but I'm not very good at math, so
I think some of the patterns were being made by engineering students at some of the universities, so they did have a good knowledge, and some of them, again, I mean, not just mathematical knowledge, but geometric knowledge. I mean, I think somebody was talking to me about this the other day, and we were talking about, is there mathematical information encoded in some of these formations? And I think, and whoever it was had said to me, you know, with the advances being made in artificial intelligence lately, it's going to be very easy to scan in a lot of these images, and if there is anything unusual encoded in here, like, it's okay if you encode the value of pi into a crop circle, that's fine, you know, people can do that. But there are all sorts of major unsolved problems in mathematics, and if we use AI, and if we were to find, I don't think we will, but I'm just saying, how could we determine if there was something genuinely unusual about this? The answer to that question is, if we found a solution to one of these major unsolved problems in mathematics, somehow encoded in a crop circle. Like I say, don't think it'll happen, but it would be jolly interesting if it did, and it would make me think again, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, maths is the language of the universe, really. If you were to ever meet an extraterrestrial, I guess the easiest way to show them that we're not totally daft is to do the Pythagoras theorem, because even though the symbols might be different, the idea is the same across the universe, isn't it? See, maths fascinates me, but I'm not very good at it.
Well, you're right. Pi is going to be pi everywhere in the universe. So it's a great baseline. And of course, we saw this in the science fiction movie Contact, which was based on the book by Carl Sagan, the astronomer and astrophysicist. So one of the central plot points there was that to get our attention, to differentiate the radio signal, the message, from the natural background noise of the universe, what they had done was to broadcast a sequence of prime numbers. And again, something like that, if we ever picked up something like that, it would be an absolute giveaway that there was a civilization, an intelligence behind this, not just the noise of the universe.
So you were in the UFO division of the MOD for 3 years. After that, what happened? Did you go straight into investigating UFOs? What's the timeline?
Well, I when I was doing that job, of course, my job there was to research and investigate the phenomenon to see whether there was evidence of any potential defense threat or issue, any national security concerns, any flight safety issues, which is another whole part of this, which is getting a lot of people interested right now. After that, I stayed in the Ministry of Defense for another, 12 years or so. I got a couple more promotions out. So I went and I did, after the UFO desk, I did a financial policy job. And then after that, I did a defense security job, which involved counterterrorism and military policing and things like that. And then I took early retirement and basically started doing freelance broadcasting and writing. By that time, my name was well known. I mean, although we did some classified work, most of what we did was public facing because most of our reports came from the public. So it wasn't a secret that the Ministry of Defense had this program. And then there was an initiative to declassify and release a lot of the UFO files, many of which, of course, I'd written. So they asked me to come back and help with that. And when people are making documentaries on this subject or having news stories or even making Hollywood movies, when they want a little bit of a sort of insider perspective as consultant or spokesperson, somebody who can say, well, how would the government really react? Very often they come to me. Before we did this interview this morning, I did a breakfast TV news interview here in the US where I now live. So there's a lot of appetite for this.
Yes, I do recall a decade ago, it must have been over a decade ago, watching this UFO documentary, and then you appeared, but it was, I think you were talking during, again, your time in the UFO division of the MOD. So it was quite old footage, but as you say, there's an interest in this, and that interest certainly is building. I've noticed in the past decade how it has built up, because when I was younger, I was kind of the odd kid for believing in aliens, and now it just seems it's a normal part of conversation, I've noticed.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. I use the phrase "out of the fringe into the mainstream," and I stand by that. Well, that documentary that you saw, by the way, where probably I had black hair at the time, and so yeah, well, there have been some changes over the years, and of course, I don't know which one you mean, but one of the interesting things is that when I was doing that job, of course, I was the person who was always put up to give the party line on this. So you would probably have seen me furiously debunking this and saying how it was all nonsense and it was all just aircraft lights and weather balloons. There's nothing to see. Move along, people, move along. And that was my job.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say, but I thought I am going to say it because at the time, yes, you were debunking, be like, no, there's no such thing. And I remember, because this stuck with me, I remember at the end of the documentary, even though the footage they showed of you was older, it must have been a slightly more recent one, because they said that you had, resigned your positions and now since we're investigating UFOs. And I was like, hang on, but he said in one hand, but you've kind of got to say that, right? If you're part of this government facility, you've got to say the party line, right? But it just
Yes.
always stuck with me as like a bit funny at the time. I was like, hang on.
Yeah, it's one of those, I suppose you could say, gamekeeper turned poacher, maybe. But having said that, there's not actually that, the devil's in the detail. There's not actually that much difference between the official position and my position now. I guess I'm just asking what if a little bit more, and I'm glad to say, as we discussed earlier, that other people have been coming around to that view. And I don't know what the situation's like in the UK, but I've lived in the US since 2012 now. And I can't begin to say to anyone in the UK just how mainstream this is here now. I mentioned the NASA study, the reports from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the fact that we've had congressional hearings, the fact that we've got multiple UFO provisions in the defense bill. I mean, can you imagine that sort of thing happening? Every now and then in Parliament in the UK, I know an MP will ask a question, but what's happening in the US is orders of magnitude above and beyond that. I mean, it's as if the Defense Parliamentary Committee was bringing the Secretary of State to the House and saying, I want answers on that. Well, that's exactly what's happening here in the US.
Yeah, it does seem, because obviously I'm still across the pond, I'm still in the UK. It does seem that there's so much more interest in the US, and they seem to have a more get up and go attitude. That is the American, to a British person, that's the American attitude of like, come on, let's solve this thing. Whereas, you know what us British people are like, we're all just, I don't know, world weary and fed up. And I keep saying recently, if Rishi Sunak disclosed tomorrow that UFOs actually exist, I think the average British person would just be like, okay, I don't care. Are they going to pay my gas bill? We're a bit passive aggressive, a bit grumpy over here. So, because one of the questions I did have, I remember it, but I didn't put it down, is one of my followers was asking, why are there more sightings in the US? And I read it and I thought, well, that's not really the case. I just think maybe there's more publicity. There's a lot of sightings that happen over here. We had Rendlesham Forest, we had like the Rudloe Manor, etc., etc. But there seems to just be more emphasis in the US over the UK because we're all grumpy here.
Yeah, I think there are really complicated factors, and it's not a level playing field. I mean, just for one point, of course, is that the population of the US is that much bigger than the UK, so there are more potential witnesses. Then there's the size of the landmass. There are issues of light pollution, all sorts of variables. But I think you're right that it's a kind of media focus as well, a sociological thing, that if it's in the news constantly, which it is over here with congressional hearings, for example, if somebody sees something, they're much more likely to say something. And so in the US, you've got a much more benign environment for reporting. And then there are all sorts of other factors, if you look at this globally, that mean you don't get reports from large parts of the world because of issues of language, culture, religion, authoritarianism, and things like that. We have very little idea, for example, what's going on in large parts of Africa, probably because they've got better things to be getting on with. Like, am I going to, have clean drinking water today and enough food on the table? So there are things like that. And there are the whole religious issues in the Middle East that might deter people from speaking out about anything that they think might run counter to official doctrine. So it's really complicated to say country X has more reports than country Y because of all these variables.
Yeah, and especially when you bring religion into the mix, because religion's a funny one, right? Because some people might be under the impression that, well, the existence of extraterrestrials would negate what their God has said. Though I have seen in more recent times I think one of the more recent popes said that, of course, aliens exist. God created them. So, they've been working around little loopholes that way. But I watched that the James Fox documentary that he did recently. It's called Moment of Contact. Have you seen it? It came out last year.
I haven't yet, but James is great, and all his documentaries are superb. So it's on my list.
Yeah, I forget which country it was. I don't know if it was a South American country. But this whole small town reported seeing this craft, and then some of the townspeople interacted with two extraterrestrials. It's a really fascinating documentary.
It's Brazil, isn't it? It's the Varginha
yes
case.
Yes, and what struck me was when I was watching this was the residents of that town. They said at the time, "Well, we thought it was a demon because we're Catholic and we're God fearing. We're of the Catholic sector of Christianity." And that struck me at the time as, well, what if you've maybe in history you've had these moments of contact with extraterrestrials, but because you have this religious bias, you would interpret it as demonic or a trick from God, etc., etc. So religion's an interesting one when it, comes into the entire UFO umbrella.
Yes, and again, as you say, witnesses can only perceive and then describe something through the lens of the language and the culture and the belief system they already have. So yeah, for sure, some people see these things in terms of gods, devils, angels, and demons. Other people in the past have looked, for the little people, dwarves and elves and fairies, and now we talk about little gray aliens. There are a lot of people who say, "I wonder if this isn't the same core phenomenon, but just seen through the different lens of perception of different people in different places." In different ages of our history.
What do you think of the gray alien phenomena, especially how it's just the image of the gray alien is synonymous with alien culture in general? If you mention aliens, it's going to be that, typical. It's in a lot of our media, a lot of films, like that film Paul with the voice of Seth Rogen. What do you think of the image of the gray, where it comes from? Because I make up a lot of theories in my head, so this probably doesn't have scientific backing at all. But I think that maybe because gray aliens seem ubiquitous, there seems to, like, with a lot of people's examples of meeting them, they all seem to look the same. Maybe it's some form of biological android, to travel through space. You've got to deal with radiation, etc. What are your thoughts on gray aliens?
Yeah, it does seem to be quite cross-cultural, but it's one of those chicken and egg arguments that you can argue yourself around in circles. Some people will say, "Oh, there's a lot of this image in science fiction and things, and maybe that gave rise to some of these comments." But then people will point out, and this is true, that, for example, when he was working on creating the X-Files, for some years, Chris Carter used to attend UFO conferences and sit in the audience and take notes about what people were seeing in terms of the UFOs themselves, the entities. So is it art imitating life or life imitating art? It's very difficult to say.
Let's go back quickly to a UK-based phenomena, Rendlesham Forest, because you have a book out on the Rendlesham Forest incident, don't you? So for my audience, my American audience who might not know what that is, can we briefly go over that?
Sure. Well, this case happened before my time on the UFO program, so it was one of my predecessors' cases, but I did a cold case review. The incident happened over 3 nights in December 1980 and involved the two bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge in the UK, but these were US Air Force bases, very close together, Rendlesham Forest in the middle of them, so to speak, between the two bases. And on the first night, some of the military police thought an aircraft had crashed in the forest, a light aircraft or something, started a small fire, and they went out there, but saw a landed triangular craft of some description, which subsequently took off vertically and shot away at high speed. what was unusual about this is it wasn't just their say-so. There were burn marks in the ground, indentations, scorch marks on the side of the trees, and radioactivity levels, which our own scientific intelligence scientists assessed as having been significantly higher than the average background. So there was that. Then there was a second night of activity. Then on the third night, the UFO came back, not a landing. And the witnesses this time included the deputy base commander, who'd put a small team together to go out. He when he was told the UFO had come back, he threw a team together, went out into the forest, as he put it, to try and debunk this UFO nonsense. He ended up being a witness himself, and the 5 or 6 people with him. He saw this thing fire a narrow beam of light just in front of him and his men. Extraordinary speeds and maneuvers and accelerations. And again, no explanation was ever found. So yeah, I teamed up with some of the United States Air Force witnesses, and we co-authored a book called Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, which is largely based on the original eyewitness testimony of the US military witnesses, and also declassified US and UK government documents on this, so people can follow the sort of paper trail of government documents talking about this.
And is there something in, because I'm aware that UFOs have been seen around military bases, maybe not frequently, but it's happened certainly more than once. And I've heard many stories from different sources about how, on occasion, unidentified flying objects have taken offline nukes and nuclear missiles. Have you heard of that? Because I've heard of these cases, but I couldn't pinpoint you to the sources. Just, going around in my head. Have you heard of such cases?
Yes, I have. There are a couple of witnesses who we believe have testified recently behind closed doors to Congress about this. One's called Robert Jacobs, one's called Robert Salas. And the Robert Salas case is 1967 Maelstrom Air Force Base. The short answer to your question is we know that these stories are out there, but they've not yet been verified. Congress, as we speak, is trying to get to the bottom of that. Like I say, there's been some testimony. Congress has demanded answers on this point, and it's one of the points written into the new defense bill that I mentioned. There are UFO provisions in it. One of the things specifically written in is Congress want to know if these stories are true or not. And so they're working on it. Obviously, because of the classification levels of anything involving nuclear weapons, it's unlikely, I think, that any of those reports will be made public. But maybe there's a kind of halfway house that we can get an unclassified version with some of the information redacted, which will at least answer your question of, did this happen or not? And if it did, is there anything that the US government and military can tell us about what caused this?
What do you personally make of it? Because for me, it sounds nice, this idea that there are these mysterious, benevolent beings who are looking out for, because the absolute wreckage and chaos that nukes can cause, they're looking out for humans, they're looking out for planet Earth. But the idea of that sounds a little bit Hollywood to me. Not saying it doesn't happen, but what do you think of it personally?
Yeah, it does sound a little bit Hollywood. I mean, it ties in with this kind of new age interpretation of the UFO phenomenon and the whole extraterrestrial question, that somehow the space brothers and the space sisters are going to come down and save us from ourselves. Well, with nuclear weapons in mind, they didn't stop Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So for all the new age people who say, oh, they'll just switch off our nukes in an instant, well, fine, but like I say, they didn't in 45. So there's no indication that that's anything other than wishful thinking. But like I say, the allegation is on the table that there has been some sort of interaction between UFOs and nuclear weapons, whether it's benevolent or malevolent or neutral, or whether it's just a technical fault or something that an adversary was trying to see if they could take our nukes offline. We simply don't know. But as I say, they're working pretty hard to get some answers, as well they should, because there could be few more serious allegations than our entire strategic deterrent is maybe something that can just be turned off at the flick of a switch.
Yeah, the new age semi woo-woo aspects, I'm far too British and cynical for that. In principle, I agree. You know, we're all one universe, one whatever. In principle, I agree, but I'm far too cynical. I don't know if this is true. I just have all this information that kind of knocks about in my head, but I can't, point you to a definitive source. But I'm very sure that I read somewhere after the New Mexico testing of splitting the atom and creating nukes happened, UFO sightings did go up. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, there is. And again, whether you're talking about things like the Roswell incident or any number of other things that happened in 1947, there's no getting away from the fact that a lot of it happened around the area where nuclear weapons were being tested, where missiles were being tested. So whether it's Roswell Army Airfield, which was the base to the only atomic bomb capable squadron anywhere in the world at the time of the Roswell incident, whether it's the White Sands missile range, or whether it's the Alamogordo nuclear facility, a lot of it was centered around there. And that of course, is what skeptics will point out and say, well, isn't that proof that this is just our own cutting edge technology that we don't want to disclose, or it's the technology of an adversary, a terrestrial adversary, spying on us? To which, of course, the counter argument is, no, if we're being visited by extraterrestrials, they'd be interested in that cutting edge of our technology. I mean, both arguments have a certain logic to them, and I suppose that's one reason why this mystery is still enduring nearly 80 years on.
Yeah, my own logic to that type of thing is, it's been 70 years since 1950. So UFOs that were seen at the time that were capable of, great feats of aeronautical maneuvers. Well, we would see it publicly now because it's been 70 years. So why the need for more secrecy? We would see, the army, like every 20 years, they unveil their new projects and new aircraft, etc., and we get to see shows of force. So what I'm saying is, if we saw UFOs in the 50s and we still don't have aircraft to this day that looks like that, in my head, that makes it extraterrestrial, because I think in 70 years we would have seen similar aircraft come out of the military complex.
Yes, I think there is a certain logic to that. It's like, where are the flying saucers?
Yeah, basically, where are they? Roswell. What do you think happened there? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Roswell.
Well, something crashed for sure, and people forget that they think this was some great story uncovered by researchers or the media or something. It wasn't. It was the US military that themselves caused a press release to be put out, and they said, and of course, Roswell came just a few weeks after a very famous sighting by a pilot called Kenneth Arnold, who saw 9 objects, and that's where the term flying saucer came from. So what happened a few weeks later with the US military putting this press release out is they said the many rumors surrounding these flying discs, people used flying saucer, flying disc interchangeably, have today been brought into focus as the 509th Bomb Group have recovered one of these mystery discs. And within 24 hours, they reversed the story and said that they'd made a mistake and it had just been a weather balloon. And they put out some pictures, obviously, of a weather balloon. And various people said, well, they switched the wreckage. And we're still debating it 80 years on. So there's not much. It's like a police case. Unless you solve it within the first 48 hours, you won't. And now when we talk about Roswell, all the contemporary witnesses are dead. A lot of the records have either been destroyed or lost over the years. There are rumors that there's some debris still floating around somewhere. Maybe it's somewhere in a basement office, like that end scene at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they put the Ark in this government basement somewhere. Maybe it's somewhere like that. Maybe it was given to an aerospace corporation like Lockheed or Northrop or Boeing or BAE Systems to try and figure out. And look, if anyone does have alien technology, I don't know that they'd be able to figure it out. If you were able to go back in time, I don't know, 5 years or something, and give someone give someone your iPhone 14, they could probably maybe go from an original iPhone and figure it out. But if you were to go back to Stone Age times, they'd just think it was a flat, shiny rock.
Yeah.
So if we were, and if we have somehow got our hands on any debris or something in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, from a civilization that might be millions of years ahead of us, could we figure it out? Or would we just be like the Stone Age people going, it's just a shiny rock? I think the latter.
So what do you make of people such as Bob Lazar, his claims that he worked at Area 51 and they had a craft and it had some sort of anti-propulsion unit that they were trying, or anti-gravity unit that they were trying to work out? What do you make of whistleblowers like him? Because Bob Lazar, I've seen him in a few interviews. He seems like quite a quiet, reserved person. So what do you make of people like that?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say. I don't think I've even met him, so it's a tough call. There is some evidence that he did work at Area 51, but there are also some question marks about a lot of his story. And there's an old saying in the intelligence analyst community: interesting if true. And that's pretty much all I can say about the Bob Lazar story. Interesting if true.
So you appear frequently on one of my favorite shows, and that's Ancient Aliens. Love the show. I think it's fantastic. I think it's good fun as well. I think sometimes people get a bit funny about Ancient Aliens, but it's entertaining and they know what they're doing, Do you think we've been visited throughout history? I know at the beginning of the conversation we kind of covered it a little bit, but do you think we've been visited by something else throughout history? Because I do.
I keep an open mind on it. I think there are some intriguing pieces of evidence. I'm not going to claim that there's a smoking gun, but ancient astronaut theorists, of course, the central premise is that we've been visited throughout history and that our ancestors misperceived these extraterrestrials as gods and worshipped them, and then built great structures and monuments in homage to these so-called gods. And I'm on the show. When I'm on the show, I tend to talk about the more modern stories involving government, military, and intelligence agencies. But I know my way around ancient astronaut theory. And I actually, as well as appearing on the show, I moderate Ancient Aliens Live, which is a spin-off, a 90-minute stage show that tours all around the US, and it's hugely popular. So I think that's at the end of the day, Ancient Aliens isn't trying to say this is definitely what happened, as it says in the narration at the very beginning. Could it be? And it's to throw out questions, and the basic question is, might there be things about our history and maybe prehistory that we've got wrong? And you've only got to look at the whole Graham Hancock controversy at the moment.
I was just about to mention Graham Hancock. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So there's always room, I think, or there should always be room for diversity of opinion. And of course, you get this horrendous pushback from a lot of the very deeply entrenched people in academia saying, oh, no, that couldn't possibly be true. And then, it seems that every month there's another discovery which pushes the human timeline further and further back. So maybe there is something to this. And I'm never a fan of that sort of closed-minded, it can't be so it isn't opinion mindset that you come up against so often. A good scientist, good academic will be open to new data and will say, okay, I hadn't thought of that. I'll take a look. Where are the data? Let's see. But when it comes to people like Graham Hancock, all they can do is throw insults and say, I'm not even looking at this. It's pseudoscience.
Yeah, because the Graham Hancock pushback, because I'm aware it's been going on for decades. Because this guy was writing, Fingerprints of the Gods decades ago. It baffles me a little bit. Sometimes I think it's coming from this really insecure place, this place of, well, no, it can't, so it isn't. Because he's just questioning, are we older than what the timeline says we are? Was there a cataclysm? And you can see throughout, well, history is biased anyway, right? Because history is written by the victors, so it's very biased, and it's written by people who had the ability to write, which most of the peasant folk didn't have the ability to write and read for thousands of years. So history is very biased. Yeah, the Graham Hancock thing, it does confound me a little bit, because even, let's get too off topic, go off on a tangent. Even Russell Brand interviewed Graham Hancock recently, and the comments on Russell Brand's post about it was full of people saying, Russell, he's a pseudoscientist. Russell Brand, who once interviewed Alex Jones, was getting pushback over Graham Hancock, who, to me, he just seems like a nice guy.
Yeah, I've met Graham several times, and as you say, he's just asking the question, could we have gotten some of this wrong? Might there have been a sort of precursor civilization that we don't yet know about fully, but which has left its fingerprints on other cultures? So again, it's not so much the sort of, this is absolutely how it is, like as with ancient aliens, it's could it be ... question mark.
And I feel like when it comes to history and even to science, I feel there should be some wonderment and some imagination. Albert Einstein, I think he thought to himself one day, what would it look like if I was traveling within a sunbeam? And then from there, he came up with the theory of relativity. And that initial idea of what would I look like if I was traveling through space within a sunbeam, that's a very imaginative thing to wonder about. That's not your everyday sort of thought, right? So I think that it's important to have an open mind, have a sense of wonderment, but, well, be curious. I think it's important to be curious.
Completely. I think it's part of intelligence is curiosity, asking questions, pushing boundaries, challenging preconceived ideas.
So for this portion, I'm going to go to my audience's questions. These are their YouTube usernames, so I might butcher some. Edavre Goodbarrel asked, what does Nick imagine other forms of plant life to be in various types of atmospheres on other planets?
Gosh, like anything and everything we could conceive, and a whole bunch of things that we can't conceive. I think the sky's the limit. And again, we mentioned the laws of mathematics being constant in the universe, but things like atmospheric composition, we know is from our own solar system is very, very different. So I think we will find a huge diversity. But here's a controversial thing. Occasionally, we may find a sort of convergent evolution point across the cosmos that certain forms might just be really, really successful. and therefore you would imagine that, I don't want to make too many assumptions, but you would imagine that random mutation and natural selection would be a sort of constant, and that good design is always going to be good design wherever you are in the universe. So we might find things that are very different, but every now and then we might come across something that is spookily similar to things right down here.
I agree with that. Caitlin Hall says, what are your thoughts on the public reaction to all of the disclosures recently?
It's interesting. I think on the one hand, particularly in the US, there's this amazement that the narrative has flipped 180 degrees and it's suddenly a serious subject. On the other hand, to go back to something you said earlier in our conversation, people have still got to pay the bills and buy the groceries, and so there's that sense of not exactly so what, but life must go on. So
yes,
it's been mixed reactions.
Yeah, I imagine there'd be more reactions more so in the US than over here, because as I said, we're all just cynical and British and trying to get on with the cost of living crisis. My mother had a question. She loves watching Ancient Aliens. I think I got my own mother into Ancient Aliens. Let's see. Why do you think the governments cover so much up? Because the reason that was given way back then when was, the public will be scared. When War of the Worlds was on the radio, people thought it was a real thing and freaked out, and they tried to leave New York and their cities, right? But the excuse that the public will be scared if they know what's really going on seems to no longer be valid, because I think that there was some sort of a survey that was taken, and they found that a lot of people would be receptive to the idea of there being aliens. So her question in a nutshell was, why do you think the government still try to cut? What do you think the government try and cover things up, and why is that? What's their motivation?
Well, sure, yeah, you're right, and she's right too. I mean, you don't scare people by telling them something they already believe, which is probably where we are now with the UFO phenomenon. So, frankly, unless we suddenly faced a sort of War of the Worlds type alien invasion, I don't think there would be panic in the streets. There would maybe be a sort of, okay, we can deal with that. Like I say, a lot of people already believe it to be true. Where I think the secrecy comes in is the technology. If any of this is extraterrestrial, the nation that first acquires that technology and figures out how to use it is arguably going to be the dominant nation on this planet for the foreseeable future. I mean, it just suddenly making a quantum leap in technology, not just military technology, but industrial technology. So when I say dominant force on this planet for the foreseeable future, I mean militarily, but also politically, economically. And those are, I think, very high stakes. And that's maybe why it is. You don't want to show, imagine it as a high stakes poker game. You don't want to show what cards you're holding. So if some people do have data about this, debris or whatever, you don't want to say, tell the American people have a right to know. Well, the moment you do that, you tell Russia, China, everyone.
I'm very sure, and I can verify the first part of this. When the Pentagon came out not too long ago and they re-released that footage of the aircraft pilots talking about being like, what is that? What's that? The Pentagon, they verified that footage is valid. And I'm very sure at the time when I read about that, I also read about the Pentagon admitting that they had. See, this is the thing. I've already asked one UFOologist about this, and she doesn't have any recollection of this. But I'm very sure I read that the Pentagon said that they had a unidentified flying aircraft not of earthly origins, and it sticks out in my mind because not of earthly origins isn't a phrase that I would personally make up. So I don't think I'm making it up, but I can't really find anything about it since. Is that ringing any bells? Not the first part, because we know that that's verified, but the second part where the Pentagon essentially said, we have a UFO, but I feel it got glossed over, so I'm not sure if I'm making that up.
No, the wording is pretty much as you recall. I mean, I think they're talking about non-terrestrial origin. Um, this came from a contractor who had worked on some of this for the Pentagon. It did not actually come from the Pentagon.
Ah.
And the Pentagon have not confirmed that information. And it's not 100% clear whether that contractor was saying something that he knew to be true from direct first-hand experience, or whether he had been told it or deduced it from somewhere else. So the short answer is it's a little bit murky.
Thank you for clearing that up, because I've literally been saying to my friends, the Pentagon admitted they have a UFO. Only a few more questions. Jojo L says, what known aircraft or structure is most commonly thought to be a UFO?
Well, I think the sorts of things that are misperceived as UFOs are probably things, if you haven't seen them, things like the B-2 stealth bomber. But I think the actual, more accurate answer to that question is things that, and you mentioned this idea a while ago. You said that there were things flying that we wouldn't hear about for 20 years, or we were talking maybe about the history of it. And that's absolutely right. So I think the answer to the question is the things most commonly, we've got things, I have no doubt, flying now that would look like they came from a Star Wars movie. But you won't see them on the evening news or at the Farnborough Air Show for 10, 15, 20 years because they're not yet publicly acknowledged and declared. So that's the answer to that question. It's the secret prototype aircraft and drones that are currently being test flown.
And I find that there's a bit of a worry in that for me personally, because I'm not sure what it's like for you over in the US, but we've had the Tories for the past 13 or so, I don't know, the past lifetime we've had the Tory government in charge. And I don't trust my government as don't a lot of British people. So there's a particular worry, and I think Stephen Greer also believes this, that what if our own governments, using technology we have, decide to do a false flag alien invasion, to get us to comply, put us under martial law. What do you think of that? Because I certainly worry about it as someone who's just a bit anti-establishment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a great believer. I'm not a believer at all in false flag alien invasion. But there is this alleged quote that Werner von Braun said, aliens will be the last card. And, so I don't know. I think it's a little far-fetched because I think it would be almost impossible to fake. But who knows? In this day and age, maybe some combination of Hollywood special effects and a really sophisticated psychological operation with government and media complicity. Who knows?
Well, we do live in an era of deep fakes now, where we can do amazing things with AI technology and CGI.
For sure.
I guess we'll just all find out in the next few years. Someone called Doom, they've said, do you believe alien species are observing us? And if so, do you believe that they pose a threat?
Well, I think there's
a risk.
Yeah, I'm sure there's life out there. I don't know for certain whether we are or aren't being visited, but if we are, I would say there's a potential threat, because in military terms, threat equals capability times intent. Capability seems quite high, intent remains unknown. And it's better to assume there's a threat and be relieved if it doesn't materialize than to assume there's no threat and get caught out if one suddenly appears.
That's why the US military has all of those contingency plans, which are public knowledge. You can look them up. They have a contingency. The US Army has a plan in place in case there's a zombie outbreak. They also have something to do with if magicians exist and are a threat. I suppose it's like army exercises to come up with these things and then work out, well, what would our response be if X, Y, Z, however fantastical happened?
Yeah, I think sometimes these things are just thought experiments rather than reflecting a genuine belief that those sorts of things will happen. But again, as you say, we live in some pretty wild times, so who knows?
And I have a final question from BL. What do you think of Tom DeLonge and all of his work in the UFO realm? Tom DeLonge, for anyone who doesn't know, I believe is the frontman of Blink 182.
Yeah, everyone wrote Tom off as just an enthusiast with a band and a little bit too much time and money on his hands. But there's no getting away from the fact that he was involved in a lot of the work that brought this subject to the fore, because he did assemble this group called the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which did have some of the people associated with it, like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and Jim Semivan and Steve Justice, they all are who they say they are and did what they said they did. And so when the history of this is written, it will be one of those really bizarre things, because there's no denying Tom DeLonge played a big part in it.
Robbie Williams is also very interested in UFOs as well. And I remember, again, like maybe 2 decades ago, it was the front page of The Sun. Robbie Williams, they were presenting him as though he'd gone crazy because he grew out a beard and he was drinking 10 Red Bulls a day and he was talking about UFOs, wanting to find UFOs. I find that very interesting, because I've listened to him speak about it and how the media tried to paint him as a crazy person chasing after imaginary flying saucers. But he's got a very big interest in the UFO phenomenon. He knows his stuff. I've listened to a few podcasts.
Yeah. I met him once in, I think, about 2007. Really? There's a photo of us somewhere together when he was in that phase of with the big beard and things. We met up at a UFO conference where I was speaking, and he was absolutely sincere on it. There are a lot of musicians who are very, very interested and involved with this. And again, I think it's because they are very often creative, outside the box thinkers. Yeah,
I agree. So I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's been nice to talk to someone else who had, well, you have much more knowledge in this subject than I could possibly, but it's been nice to talk to someone about this, because I think about UFOs quite a lot.
Well, thanks. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I hope the people watching do as well. So thank you.
So, Nick, where can people find you? Are you on social medias? Do you have any upcoming books, events, talks?
My website is nickpope.net. On Twitter, I am Nick Pope MOD. And people can catch me on Ancient Aliens Live, a new TV series that I created and host called After Contact, which is on Forbidden Knowledge TV, and much more besides.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And to the viewers, thank you so much for listening or watching. Make sure that you follow us on Spotify and iTunes. If you're on Spotify, give me a 5 stars, please. And for YouTube, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. And I'll see you all very soon. Bye.